Well, on this particular mudlarking outing, it was very, very windy and stormy, and so the noise distortion was quite bad, so I'm going to spare your ears from that and do a little bit of narrating. But as I was walking across the mud, looking from side to side, as I always do, my eyes fell upon a very small, oval, metallic object. I don't know if you can see it just there. You will very shortly. And it was quite amazing, really, that I noticed it, because it blended in very well to the mud. But the light was shining in just the right place. And here it is. I picked it up to have a closer look, and I could see that there was an anchor on there, which was what caught my eye initially. I thought that maybe it was some form of naval or military button. On looking on the other side, though, I could see that it most definitely was not a button or a piece of jewellery. And I wasn't absolutely certain what it was. I could also see that there were some markings around the edge, but I couldn't work out whether they were letters, whether it was lettering around the edge, or whether it was some form of decoration. But I did have the sense at that point that it was something potentially really exciting, and I couldn't wait to get home to have a closer look at it under my magnifying lamp. Even after washing it, I couldn't make out what it was around the edge there. And so, watch this space and come along with me on this journey later on to see exactly what it is and find out what I managed to find out about it. And this is a very good example of how a mudlarking find can take you on a journey and take you down a rabbit hole where you learn some fascinating info and historical facts. Now, the next thing I spotted in the mud was also extremely well camouflaged. It fits right in there amongst all the stones and the mud. I don't know if you can see it. It has a little frilly edge to it, and it's nestled in there amongst the stones. And it reminded me of a couple of similar objects which I found over the last couple of years. And it is what I believe to be the top of an 18th, or 19th rather, a 19th century tobacco box. A little finial there made of pewter, I think, and I do have two others very, very similar. So I will get them out and show them to you as well. So then I carried on walking slowly along the tide line, lifting up rocks and pebbles, looking very, very carefully at the mud, really in the moment to see if I could spot anything else that might be of interest. And as usual, there are plenty of these old 19th century shipbuilding nails. There's something really nice about those. They're very, very tactile. And then I picked up what I thought might be a coin, but it was in fact a stone. Sometimes these stones, they do look a little bit like coins when they're sitting there in the mud. So I walked on a little bit further, and then I noticed something round just down here. Now, was it going to be some form of washer, something industrial, or was it a ring? Look at that, it's a bit battered and it's lost its stone, but it's a little ring. Oh, that's so special. I wonder who wore that once upon a time. Well, I'm on a bit of a roll here. So let's keep looking really carefully as well. Now, amongst all this pottery and these shells and pipe stems, I've just seen this, look, an old fishing hook. Pretty lethal too. So, what else have we got here? This looks interesting. Some kind of little handle or a lever attached to something at some point. I rather like that though. I think it would look really nice if I polish it up, and I might be able to use it in some form of assemblage. And what else can I see here? This looks like a very nice keyhole, or you may prefer to call it an escutcheon. I wonder what that's doing down here in the mud. It's just incredible, really, to think that all these things are just lying here, dropped by people well over 100 years ago. And that includes this here. This is some form of hook, which is attached to the eye of the hook, actually. It probably came off of a garment, I think. Or maybe you may have some ideas about that. I'm going to take you over here and tell me if you see what I'm looking at. Look at that there. In that little pool, I can see the figure of a man. Isn't that beautiful? I'm going to stop the camera a minute because I want to take a photograph of it like that in situ. Right, I've taken my photo, so let's take this out. I mean, it would be amazing if it had a stem. Oh, it might have a little bit of a stem. Oh, just a little bit. But a little bit is better than nothing. Now look at that. I think it's a man in coattails. Oh, that's a man in coattails, very possibly. And then some kind of coat of arms there, I think. Oh no, it's a ship, I think. Yeah, it's a ship in full sail, I believe. And then there's another person here on his knees. Looks a bit sort of Francis Drake-like, doesn't it? And look at that long spur, which dates it to, I believe, if I'm not much mistaken, the early or mid 1700s. And soon that black colour will fade. It's like that because it's been in the mud for so long. But now that the air's getting to it, that will fade and we'll be able to see the design a lot better. So a figure here, a ship, and a man on his knees. What a great find! Woo! Now, back to this one, which I think, do you know what? It's a piece of chalk masquerading as a pipe. There you go. That's what that was. Wow, I am thrilled with that pipe. I wonder who dropped it. You know, it's always something that I think when I find a pipe like that. I think, wow, who was the last person to touch that pipe? All those hundreds of years ago. Right, we've got another sign of pipage here. See this stem? Now, I've pulled on it and there's no initial give, so that indicates to me that there could be a bowl lurking beneath this mud. So we're about to find out. Still no pipe stem coming out, look. There has to be a bowl in there, unless there's a little person holding on to the other end. Right, so some careful extraction is necessary. Look at that. There's a bowl in there, see? Let's pull it out of its muddy home, where it has been, I have to tell you, since the 1700s. Isn't that kind of mind-blowing? Look, here we are. I'm pulling it out on a rather chilly day too. Sorry about that, pipe. That is lovely, and I reckon there'll be a maker's mark on there, on the heel. Yep, I'm going to take a look at that, a closer look at that at home. Wow, how special! How special is that? Again, I wonder who last held this pipe and what they were thinking when they were having a smoke. Little did they know that hundreds of years later somebody was going to come along and be very excited to find what they tossed away. Well, look what I found here. There seems to be some kind of pot eroding out of the mud. It's broken, but I'm going to see if I can get it out. Maybe we can stick it back together again. Let's have a look and see if we can get it out. Look, I can see the rim down here. Okay, well, this is what I have managed to recuperate, and I think it might be most of the pot. And so I'm going to try and stick that back together, a little project. And I've got very muddy in the process. Look at this beautiful piece of pottery. It's gorgeous. Hi everyone, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for accompanying me on that mudlarking expedition along the River Thames in London, searching for history. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of those objects and what I have found out about them. But first of all, today it is the 3rd of March 2022, and as you are of course aware, there are some extremely sad and dreadful things going on in the world at the moment. And so I didn't feel that I could really just go on and pretend that nothing is happening without making reference to it. And just to say that if any of you are in any war-torn country whatsoever, if you're experiencing violence and war, then all my love and hope goes out to you. And also, of course, many of you, or many of us, are very lucky we're not in a war-torn country at the moment. But this does give rise to a lot of anxiety. And one of the reasons I started to mudlark, actually, or one of the reasons I became obsessed with mudlarking after I started it, was that I found there was so much peace down on the river whilst I am searching for things, whilst I'm in the moment and looking for little pieces of history. My mind is not on my worries, and that anxiety just sort of disappears. And so if you are experiencing anxiety at the moment, and you can get down to a beach to do some beach combing, or if you can get out in the garden or a field or down by a river, just to be in the moment and search around looking for little pieces of nature or history, then it really is good for mental health. And it certainly has helped me, because I have a great tendency to get anxious. And so I know that when I'm searching around, I'm just really focusing on what I'm doing, and it really helps. I mean, I'm so used to finding remnants of the war in the River Thames, and I look at it and it's something historical. Pieces of shrapnel, bullets, some military buttons. They're things that happened years ago, and most of the artefacts that we find in the Thames are from World War II or World War I, and it's just awful to think that even now war is such a part of our present day. And so again, if you're experiencing any war and violence, I just want to send you all my love. Right, so now I want to talk to you about the objects which I found today, but one in particular which I'm really excited to share some information with you about, and it is this little object here. It's the first thing I found. Now I've got to tell you that when I played the recording back and it was so windy, I was really annoyed, because I would have much preferred to share with you the original recording, but it really was so blustery that I had to do a narration over it. But I'm going to tell you what I found out about it. And as you can see, there's an anchor there. Some of you may have already guessed what it is. It is a wax seal stamp, and it comes from the mid-19th century. Actually, I can be a little bit more precise. It dates to between 1832 and 1852, and I'll tell you how I know that later. So in the middle there's the fouled anchor, and round the edge there are indeed some words, and it says Commodore Superintendent Woolwich. And so I'm going to explain to you a bit about this. So the Woolwich refers to Woolwich Dockyard. Now, what was Woolwich Dockyard? Well, it was a very, very significant English naval dockyard. It was actually founded in 1512 by King Henry VIII to make one of his flagships, Henri Grâce à Dieu, known as Harry. And so from the beginning of the 16th century right up to the mid-19th century, hundreds of ships were built at Woolwich Dockyard and also refitted there. So it employed hundreds of people. There was so much activity going on there. It really was a thriving place. And so that is the dockyard part, the Woolwich Dockyard. So the Commodore Superintendent, who was he, or who were they, the Commodore Superintendents? Well, they were senior British naval appointments, and the Commodore Superintendent of a dockyard was in charge of the command and control of everybody who worked in the dockyard, and in charge of all the administration, that kind of thing. And interestingly, in Woolwich Dockyard, when I looked up the Commodore Superintendent, it came up with 5 names, and there were in fact just 5 Commodore Superintendents between the years of 1832 and 1852. The role was just there for 20 years. Beforehand it was called something else, and afterwards, very shortly afterwards, the dockyard shut. So this wax seal stamp would have been pretty special and probably kept under lock and key. So it was probably used by all 5 of those Commodore Superintendents of Woolwich. Now, I bought myself a little bit of sealing wax, unfortunately not red. So wanting to find out more about what kind of letters this wax seal stamp would have sealed, I set out to do some investigating on the good old internet, and as usual, it came up trumps. And before long, I came across some correspondence from 1852 between the Admiralty and the Commodore Superintendent of Woolwich Dockyard. And excitingly, it related to the Erebus and Terror, the 2 ships which are linked to the failed Arctic expedition led by Sir John Frankin. Now, I had no idea, and I was pretty excited to find out, that the Erebus and the Terror were actually refitted for that expedition, which left Woolwich Dockyard in 1845. They were refitted with all the mod cons of that time, a special propeller, all sorts of things. And actually, I have my book here about Woolwich, or lots of things about Woolwich, and it mentions Sir John Frankin, perhaps the most remarkable and most calamitous of Arctic explorations, was that undertaken by Sir John Frankin and his brave companions in the summer of 1845. Her Majesty's ships Erebus and Terror were placed at his command and were fitted out with great care at Woolwich under the direction of Sir John himself. The vessels were put in commission at Woolwich on Tuesday, March the 4th, which is kind of interesting, by the way, because it's actually March the 3rd today, and sailed on Monday, May the 17th. It also mentions the provisions which were loaded at Woolwich Dockyard. They were considerable and consisted of preserved provisions of various kinds, a large quantity of tea and extra strong West Indian rum, 35% overproof. 10 fine live oxen also were shipped at the Woolwich Dockyard. And so they went off, packed with rum and oxen and about 8,000 tins of food and all sorts of things, and everything looked really positive. But they never came back. And they were never found. And there were various rumours and theories as to what happened, but they were never found. But in 1851, some people saw a couple of masts sticking out of the ice up there in frozen Canada somewhere, and they wondered if these ships could be the Erebus and the Terror. And so the Admiralty wrote to the Commodore Superintendent of Woolwich Dockyard to find out how those masts and how the ship was painted so that they could see if it was indeed the ships. The Admiralty, 2nd of June 1852, to the Commodore Superintendent Woolwich. Referring to your communication of the 17th of April last upon the subject of painting the Erebus and Terror, my Lord's desire that you will state for their information how their lower masts were painted. By command of their Lordships, signed W.A.B. Hamilton. Woolwich Dockyard, 2nd of June 1852. Sir, agreeably to your minute on Captain Hamilton's letter of yesterday, we have to acquaint you that the lower masts of the Erebus and Terror were painted white when they left this port. Signed Oliver Lang, Master Shipwright, Office of the Commodore Superintendent, Woolwich. So it's amazing to think that this wax seal stamp, which has lain in the mud for well over 150 years, could have been the wax seal stamp that sealed the envelope of that letter from the Commodore Superintendent and Oliver Lang, the Master Shipwright, and sent to the Admiralty back in 1852. And it's that I love about mudlarking, because I guess my favourite finds are those that I can link to a person from the past or a place from the past. And in this instance, it's an event from the past, and a tragic and sad one. Now, I actually live very close to Woolwich and Greenwich, and down in the old Royal Naval College there is a memorial to Sir John Franklin and all of his crew who perished during that fateful expedition. And so I decided to take a little trip down there and have a look at it. I'm here right by the River Thames at Greenwich, and behind me is the Royal Naval College, currently being used for some kind of film set. And this is where we are going to visit. We're going to the Royal Naval College Chapel, which is just over there. So here I am at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich, where I've come to see this memorial in memory of Sir John Franklin and the officers, as well as the petty officers, seamen and Royal Marines who lost their lives during that fateful voyage to the Arctic. It's pretty impressive, even though apparently Sir John Franklin's wife didn't think it was. And if we look at this figure here, this one, it represents the hope before the voyage, and then this figure here, the despair. Then you can see the icebergs up here, the ship's masts. Now, there aren't all of the names of the crew, just the officers and the leaders of the expedition. And underneath lie the remains of one of Franklin's companions who perished in the Arctic regions in 1848, discovered and brought away from King William's Land by Captain Hall, the United States Arctic explorer. So the hope and the despair. And whilst I'm in Greenwich, I'd like to show you another memorial which also has links to our ill-fated Arctic explorers, and it's just over here. It's the one that you can see, this rather impressive monument here, and it is in memory of Joseph René Belleau, who participated in at least 2 expeditions to try and find Sir John Franklin and the Erebus and the Terror. There were, of course, several expeditions to try and find the Terror and the Erebus, and they all failed. There were some arranged by Sir John Franklin's wife and others by the Admiralty. And Belleau here, a French lieutenant, went on a couple, and it was during the second one that he also lost his life, and so there is this memorial to him here in Greenwich, very close to the Royal Naval College, to the chapel where we just saw the memorial to Sir John Franklin. So despite several expeditions sent out during Victorian times to try to discover the whereabouts of the Erebus and the Terror and to solve the mystery of what happened to Sir John Franklin and his crew, nothing was found until 2014 during an expedition led by Parks Canada, when the Erebus was finally discovered and the Terror was also located. And I've greatly enjoyed finding out more about Sir John Franklin's expedition, all thanks to this little mudlarking find here, which really has brought history alive. It's just so much more than an object when a whole historical event unravels itself in front of your very eyes. And yes, it feels rather special to have stamped a letter or an envelope with this wax seal stamp, knowing that the last person who used it was probably Captain Henry Eden, the Commodore Superintendent of Woolwich Dockyard, back in 1852. Wow, isn't that mind-blowing? And it kind of makes the other objects I have here in front of me fade a little bit into insignificance, so we will not spend too long on them, but very quickly. Of course, we have the clay pipes here. This one from the early 18th century, and this one I will show you because, of course, the colour has faded now back to a nice creamy colour as it was originally, and it really fits the theme of a voyage expedition, really, because it's got the ship here on the front in full sail, and then it has two people in coattails, one on his knees, one standing up, almost reminiscent of how the memorial was down at the Royal Naval College, although I think that this pipe dates a little bit prior to that expedition. I'm thinking more likely to be 1750 to 1800, this pipe, but I could be absolutely wrong. We've also got, linked to tobacco, a lovely finial here, and I've got a few of these, and there's absolutely no doubt that Sir John Frankin and his crew would have had plenty of tobacco on the ship, and possibly in a box with a finial like that on it. And this very delicate little ring here, as always. It just makes me wonder how that came to be in the river. It's certainly been there a while. It's very, very thin and very, very delicate. I did find a fish hook, which I couldn't actually lay my hands on. I'm not sure what's happened to it. So here is another one, which I found a couple of years ago in the same style. I think the one I found, like this one, is probably Victorian too. It's like a spade fish hook with that flat bit here, but this one is a lot more ornate with that fish. So they probably had some of these on the Erebus and the Terror too. In fact, a lot of the things that I found could have been part of that expedition. You just never know, do you? And lastly, here is my Thames found reconstructed pot in all its cracked glory. Thrown together rather hastily, I have to admit, but quite successfully. There's only a few little pieces missing there. And it was quite fun putting it together. It was like assembling some kind of Thames mudlarking jigsaw puzzle. Judging by all this stuff, this drippy stuff down the sides, I think it must have been used for some kind of industrial purpose. It's probably involved in some kind of industrial process, although what exactly I'm not sure. Inside it's perfectly clean and really nicely glazed. I think it probably dates to the late 19th century. So that is it for the Thames mudlarking finds for today, and what an interesting selection of finds. My favourite has to be this, linked to the voyage of Sir John Frankin to the Arctic. And before I go, and in keeping with that theme of expeditions to cold places, I wanted to share some footage with you. Last October, I went down to Woolwich on a very rainy day to capture some footage of the RSS Sir David Attenborough, which is a recent polar research ship. Huge, great thing. It's called the Sir David Attenborough. There was a vote here in the UK at the time as to what it was going to be called, and it was going to be, well, the public voted for it to be called Boaty McBoatface, but the powers that be decided that that wasn't going to happen. So it was named the Sir David Attenborough, and actually one of the tiny little submarines on the ship has been named Boaty McBoatface. But anyway, it was on the way to the Antarctic, and so I ran down there in the pouring rain to capture it as it went through the Thames barrier. And just like the Erebus and Terror, it went the same route past what would have been Woolwich Dockyard, whereas the Erebus and Terror were on the way to the Arctic. that Sir David Attenborough was on the way to the Antarctic, so I thought it quite fitting to share this with you in this video. So before that, I would like to say thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you very much, as always, for your comments and your feedback and your emails. Thank you too to everybody who has donated to my Ko-fi account. I really appreciate it. And mostly, thank you for being you. And wherever you are in the world, I wish you much happiness, much peace, and much love. Thank you. Bye-bye.